Hello to the world and welcome to the lonesome, tiny, sparsely populated country of Transvaal. My name is Dairuka and I will be your host for today. Our goal for this playthrough is going to be quite simple. We're going to turn this one province minor country and turn it into the premier dominator of all of Africa. We will become a force to be reckoned with by even Great Britain and France, who would deign to rule over Africa in our stead. So quickly, like and subscribe and let's get into it. Alright, let's begin with our basic startup of Transvaal. It's not quite as complicated as some other countries that we played as, but it's still not purely straightforward, so there will be a few tricks of the trade that we will be employing. Now obviously, the first thing we need to set up is corn laws. Corn laws is, after all, cruise control for world conquest, and even though Transvaal starts off with a relatively modernized country with modernized laws, there are still a few laws that we're going to want to take where our market liberal will come in handy. Those laws include, but are not limited to, homesteading, free trade, laissez-faire, and believe me, you're going to want laissez-faire for this playthrough, and obviously per capita taxation. Now, we could take that now, but it's not worth it just yet, not until we get that market liberal. Now, one of the things that you could probably have to do through this playthrough is you're going to have to force through no migration controls, even though the landowners aren't going to like it. Another thing the landowners are going to absolutely hate are the slavery bans that you're going to have to push through, and unfortunately, that's something you need to do for the sake of getting the all-important multiculturalism, because without multiculturalism, you're going to be looking at a very sad, upset society where everybody's pissed off at all times, because you literally only have 10,000 people in this country that are actually accepted, and 552,000 which are violently hostile. What the heck? However, before we play around in the government screen, we do need to remember to enact corn laws with this unique start. We will first need to encourage exports in the grain screen, and then we will actually need to export the grain. Just 3 trade routes should be enough to get us over 25%, which is the threshold that we need for corn laws to enact. But there's one more very important thing that we do need to remember, and that's to go to the government screen and bring in the landowners. And while we're here, why not the armed forces too? Now the reason why you need to do that is because having the landowners in the government is part of the prerequisites for enacting corn laws. The next thing I want you to pick out while you're in the government screen is going into laws and then colonization, so you could pick out frontier colonization. Now the reason why I want you to pick frontier colonization is because look at that, you get a 29.6 and a 9.8 endorsement rating from rural folk and the armed forces that we just put into government by force. Now that's a very, very good rating for a very first law in a game. You're looking at 40% chance each time you get a tick on there for it to go through. That is perfect for what we need. But I understand what you're probably saying. But Dairuka, I want to push through homesteading right away. Well, I have to remind you up front that there is a 56% chance of being stalled because of how ridiculously powerful the landowners are. You want to wait until you get your market liberal around so you can push up the odds as much as the game is willing to let you push them up. At the same time, frontier colonization being quick and easy will allow you to colonize your immediate surroundings of Northern Cape and Zululand, which is perfect for what you need. You will want these lands completed as soon as possible because they are useful towards our inevitable population growth through mass migrations due to their adjacency to Transvaal. Next up, people, I want you to go into your buildings tab and I want you to pick out privatization on your millet farms and livestock ranches. I do mean privatize everything. You want to come back to the screen multiple times through your playthrough so you can keep privatizing all the way up until the point where you get laissez-faire as your law. I know people dislike the idea of aristocrats getting even a smidgen of power from this kind of action, but I can assure you that the trade-off of even a little extra cash towards your investment pool is so worth it for this country. Privatize even the millet farms, even the ranches. Don't forget, later on the farmers will purchase the farms as well, which can be useful when you get postal services technology for a boost of 20%. Not to mention, they have a tendency to favor the labor unions later on. As for technologies, my suggestion is to start with the always super duper important empiricism. It's become a staple of most of my playthroughs, but I honestly do believe that empiricism is by far the best choice to begin with when you're playing as a backwater country like Transvaal with only 25% literacy rating. Mappy bonuses from Stock Exchange do help, but they only help after the first few years of a tiny country's life when you could start pumping out construction sectors. Yet empiricism is immediately useful the moment you research it, as it helps your literacy rate grow the moment it's passed. But it works everywhere, not just in your incorporated lands, but in your unincorporated lands as well. You will not be able to immediately incorporate all of your future conquests anyways, so that is an even bigger bonus to have. However, don't take this as me taking pot shots at the all-important Stock Exchange. Obviously, we want the Mappy bonus granted to us by Stock Exchange. As such, I sincerely suggest you take it as your second technology and then beeline for railways, as we will need those completed as soon as possible as well. Afterwards, I would probably suggest you to get banking, and the reason why is because you get a 10% minting bonus, which is going to be very useful for us because we're in an area where we get a lot of gold in our homeland and the conquests in the immediate vicinity. Now heading into the budget screen, let's begin by turning up the taxes to very high. I understand it brings our government legitimacy down to 63, but believe me when I say this, that doesn't really matter this early in the game. You're probably not going to be looking at many loyalists or radicals for the first year anyways, and believe me when I say this, you will not be dealing with many radicals as a result of the very high taxes, and you will get more loyalists later on because of this play. Just remember that after 1 year, you turn the very high taxes back to medium. At the same time, what you might want to do is you might want to put in the liquor consumption tax, and I suppose while we're here, the meager 36-pound tea tax. Why? Because you have way too much authority and nothing to use it on. Now, I understand we cannot touch the government wages because we don't have any government buildings. That can be a little bit of a problem for us right now, but while we're here, we might as well turn up the military wages to very, very high. The reason why is quite simple. You're going to be doing a lot of conquest as Transvaal. If you don't do conquest, you do not grow, and that's a problem. And with all of my runs, conquest is always going to be a major focal point because infamy is a resource like any other, and you should always have infamy decay going at all times. You do not get penalized with decay until about 25% anyways, so always take advantage of the infamy decay. Conquer everything. Now, moving on to the build order, there really isn't much that we can do with such a tiny country of only 562,000 people. That is almost completely insignificant for what we actually want to do with our country. But we still need to set up the basic mappy for our construction sectors, so start off with a single logging camp, then move on to a single construction sector, move on to a single tooling workshop, and then finally one single iron mine. I know it's just a reminder at this point because we are going to be taking over Gaza, and once you take over Gaza, you will want to put in a single port and probably put it right after your construction sector, but that's okay because it's there as a reminder so you do not forget for later on. Now, let's drop the decrees. We have an absolute abundance of authority right now, so we might as well grab the ever so popular road maintenance and social mobility. That's something that pretty much everybody's going to want to start with anyways. That 10% state construction efficiency is delectable. It's a whole extra 1 construction just from that alone. Well, more like 0.5, but that's still huge. At the same time, you're going to want to obviously grab social mobility for the huge bonus to your qualifications, which is something you're going to have a lot of trouble with in the early game, especially when it comes down to the time to actually building up your bureaucracy. You will run into problems. I ran into problems. Everybody's going to run into those problems as they go along. And at the same time, while we're here, we might as well grab something a little unusual for this kind of gameplay. You want Enlistment efforts. And the reason why is because we're going to be taking the Zulus to task. And you want as many conscripts as fast as humanly possible when you do take the Zulus to task. So it's very imperative that you take enlistment efforts this early on, especially since we're a national militia and not a professional army. But wait, there's more! Greener Grass campaign might not help us yet, but the absolute moment that we take over Gaza, we're going to be seeing an influx of our conquered lands population coming to fill up Transvaal. And since we only have 562,000 people living here, we need every soul that we can get. It is imperative that we keep this decree up for most of the game. Even after the fact that we have all the transfer from the immediate vicinity, you're going to want those mass migrations coming in. You're going to want as many people moving into Transvaal as humanly possible, because Transvaal and Weerstadt are amazing mappy centers, but they start off with such a bloody pitiful population. This is necessary to correct that massive issue. Finally, there's that last 100 authority. You don't actually have to use it immediately. You could take encourage resource industry, but you don't absolutely have to. In fact, what I typically like to do is I like to wait until I conquer Gaza and then put down a promote social mobility decree on it, or even the road maintenance on it, because we will be building there very, very shortly after we conquer it. Now, let's take some time to look through the rivalry menu. At this point, there are only two options, but believe me when I say this, both of them are perfect for what you need to be doing in this game. Conquest. Rival both Orange and Portugal because, believe it or not, I've discovered that the British are much, much, much more likely to drop Orange as a guaranteed independence target if Transvaal happens to rival them, because they like us more. So you can increase your RNG odds by doing this one lovely little step. At the same time, pissing off Portugal is always a lovely little bonus too, because they're more likely to enter into a war against you if you should happen to attack either the Congo or Marina Kingdom later on. That gives you a chance to take the immediate lands around Gaza without drawing in the British. Speaking of the British, butter up to them. Butter up to them right now! You want to be on their good side for the mass majority of the game. Yes, they will be 100% your rivals when it comes to the domination of Africa, and you will eventually want to turn on them from the mid to late game. But for now, you are extremely weak, extremely pliable, so be their friend. At the same time, you're going to want to keep that lovely guarantee of independence from Britain for as long as you can. Heck, if you get a chance, ally with them. You can even do something crazy and join their bloc if you think you can manage the leverage. Of course, I personally prefer to create my own blocks these days, just to avoid the leverage issues later on. Finally, on this menu, make sure you don't even bother to declare any interests, because all you have access to right now are Congo and Zanj, and you don't want either of those at the moment. So what you're going to want to do instead is wait until you take over the Gaza line, and once you do that and get a port in place, you can declare interests all over the world. You may want to keep a very close eye on Orange's relationship with Britain as you play through as well. I honestly check on them every single year if possible, because that window of opportunity to attack Orange without British intervention can sometimes only last a year at a time. So again, consider this a warning. Be vigilant. Now comes the army setup. Hire the absolute best general that you can. Although I would suggest focusing on the defensive for the beginning. You're going to want to go to war with the Zulu very early on in the playthrough, and the best way to win against them is to hold a defensive front and lure them into combat. So abusing defensive bonuses is the best way to destroy their army numbers. The other areas of conquest won't be nearly as difficult. Both Orange and Gaza will fold the moment you send even a slightly higher amount of troops their way, which you should be able to thanks to being the mighty, mighty, but tiny country of Transvaal. You don't really need to set up your mobilization this early on in the run as Transvaal. You can set up the liquor supplements if you wish, but you will suffer from a shortage up until the moment you take Gaza and build a port. I usually do take it this early on so I do not forget later on, which is something I tend to do far too often. Just remember, after taking Gaza and setting up an immediate port, you can start trading for liquor with the British. Next up, conscript pretty much everything you can, and I do mean max everything out, because you are a national militia and not a professional army. My personal choice for this setup is 9 basic troops, 5 lovely horsemen, and then 5 cannon artillery. You have to recognize that even though you're going to have a shortage of cannon artillery in the early run, remember, the moment we conquer Gaza, we're going to have a port set up, and we can start trading with the British for artillery to make up for that deficit. Speaking of conquest, let's take this opportunity to declare war on Gaza. We go to war! Remember that port is pivotal to our success as a nation, and we can no longer suffer their existence any longer. Thankfully, they are pitifully weak, and we are looking at a very, very quick war. So send even a single troop their way and make them fold like a lawn chair. Now, finally, let's unpause. Now, make sure to pause again the moment that corn laws enacts. Doing so will give you a chance to bring up the trade menu so you can immediately remove those trades that we made earlier to get corn laws in the first place. Also, make sure to change encourage exports back to no priority so that you can keep your populace relatively happy for the time being. Now, unpause again, and we are going to wait very, very patiently for the war with Gaza to start. Once it gets to about the halfway point for escalation, we are going to highlight our troops and we're going to mobilize. The purpose of doing that is to save just a tiny, tiny bit of money in the meantime. But at the same time, once it gets around the red zone, we're going to deploy our troops to the front so that they can move in and hold the front before the battles actually start. This is an important thing to do, specifically for the fact that we don't want to have our troops face any major attrition before the war even begins, which is something that can happen when you put them to the front right away. Now look at that. We've already got Gaza. It took 0 effort. Perfect. Just perfect. But here's the catch. We're not done yet. Now, before we move on to the next step, what I would like you to do is to actually create a lovely little port. And while we're at it, we're going to move that port over in the construction menu to right before the tooling workshops and right after our construction sector is built. We want that port built ASAP. We do not want to wait for it at all. Once you have that port underway, I want you to immediately conquer the Zulu. Unpause just a little bit so that you get your numbers started, and then mobilize. Bring up every single conscript you can. In fact, you can recruit even 3 more conscripts from the new port of Gaza. That's perfect for what you need because you want to be able to get these troops up ASAP in preparation for the war with the Zulu. But here's the catch. Once again, we're going to be very, very patient. We're going to wait up until the halfway mark just like we did before to mobilize fully. It's okay if it takes a little faster because we want our conscripts to grow up as fast as they can. But here's another catch. We're once again going to move our troops in just a little bit earlier so that we know exactly what kind of numbers we're dealing with. We want to be within the -10 to maybe +5 region so that the Zulu armies will always want to attack or advance on us. That is the goal at the end of the day for what we need from them anyhow, because we want to be purely on the defensive. In fact, we're going to go and set the defensive front up right now. And look at that, I already got gold for Transvaal. Perfect. But here's the thing. The moment that they are no longer going to advance forward is the moment we're going to do a little bit of a cheaty thing. We're going to take some of our troops back and we're going to pull them back if we need to get what we need, because we want to be able to win each and every single fight. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is if we... Oh, look at that. We're already at 56%. We're going to swap over to advance front because this war is over! We have already won after a single fight. It's perfect in every imaginable way. I'm loving it, and I hope you're loving it too, because it's that simple. Look at that. We're not even done with the first year yet, and we're already expanding to an exponential rate. Absolutely perfect in every imaginable way. Now, with the Zulu completely conquered and out of our way, we are going to be looking towards doing something completely different. We're going to be adding to our frigate line. And the best way to do that is to go into exports and find us a man of war to click for. Obviously, the British will be the cheap one, so that's the one we're going to pick. And then afterwards, we're going to add for our frigates. Obviously, we can't put it in NATO yet because they do not have the qualifications, but we're still going to try anyhow, because even 5 to 10 sailors will be enough to give us a ship, and that's exactly what we need at this moment. And now would you look at that? Frontier colonization before 1838. What a spectacular start we're having to this run. Speaking of spectacular starts, just look at that. We're actually able to fight Orangi within the first 2 years of the game starting. That is almost entirely unheard of, considering what we're normally used to dealing with, which is around a 10-year mark for Britain to finally give up the guarantee of independence on Orangi. But you know what? We're going to take full advantage of this. We're going to get our colonies down in place, and we're going to send our troops in place with as many conscripts as we can to take Orangi as fast as we can. We want that land, and more importantly, we want that gold. Now, Orangi, welcome to the great country of Transvaal as our second great state with high mappy for construction sectors and more. Don't you worry, you will fit in just fine. We guarantee it. But our drive for conquest isn't complete yet. We still have many other targets to go through. For instance, we will begin by taking on the Zulu. Unfortunately for now, we were not capable of getting Brunei before the Dutch East Indies were able to grab it. But that's okay, because we have plans to take it later. It looks like the Zulu backed down. The cowards! But that's okay, because it frees us up to now release Brunei as a puppet, and it'll also free us up to attack their neighbors, Balungan. It took a little longer than we would have preferred to take Balungan, but eventually, after a little bit of fighting on our end, they do fall and they do become our protectorate, something which we will correct later on by making them into a proper vassal. After devouring the Maldives, Kathiri, and Mara, as well as a sizable proportion of Ethiopia, while we were in the midst of a war with Borana, it seems that we pissed off the Dutch East Indies, and they started a diplomatic play against us to conquer what we have of Brunei. Unfortunately for them, we are not a weak country anymore. We are a sizable standing army with a very capable fleet, while they are not. However, it seems the cowards were not through yet. They pulled in Portugal, our long-standing rival, against us, with the intention to overwhelm us with sheer numbers and a sheer number of fronts. Unfortunately for them, we're friends with the greatest power in the world, Great Britain! This little mistake is going to cost them dearly, though I will not be taking anything from Portugal this time. From the Dutch East Indies, we're going to be taking a very sizable chunk of Borneo, including all of Brunei. 10 years have passed and we've already pressured through no migration controls, and we're on the fast track to fully modernizing our country. There's just a few steps left, such as laissez-faire as well as multiculturalism, but looking at what we have now, we can look back at what we've done with pride. 20 years have passed, and it is finally time for us to get our vengeance against Portugal and their Dutch East India allies. Now, as per our revenge, we're going to be taking from the Portuguese Zambezia, Mozambique, and Lorenzo Marques. And from the Dutch East Indies, we're going to take East Borneo and another one of their subjects. They truly were fools to think that they could stand up against me before, but now I'm even stronger than I was before, with an army twice the size of what I had when I beat them the first time. They have no other allies to save them. They have no armies to save them. They are doomed. Portuguese South Africa fell with barely even a fight, but the Dutch East Indies are constantly opening up new fronts to keep us from completely overwhelming them, and this has become a bit of a slog, but that's okay, because once the Portuguese are completely mopped up, we bring in our other units to slowly and surely overwhelm every last front that is left on Borneo. Then, like dominoes, they topple one after another. With the Portuguese and the Dutch East Indies now under heel, we spend the remaining 3 years completely unifying the Ethiopian subcontinent, one country at a time. After multiple years of non-war and focusing entirely on our economy's growth, we then once more venture out and begin to pick at the Marina Kingdom. The Marina Kingdom put up a valiant effort, far more valiant effort than anything that the Portuguese have ever done. But alas, the moment I make landfall on the island, that is it, they fall. I was waiting for my colonies to begin expanding southward towards Burundi, and I was waiting for more openings to show up along the African subcontinents, but unfortunately nothing came up, so I looked over to South America, to Chile and Argentina for targets. I picked a fight with Chile, and Argentina joined in, and I took them both down, but in doing so, the Mapuche uprising took over and managed to take the entire southern portion of La Plata. But I couldn't be concerned with Mapuche because I had another problem to deal with. Portugal joined in the war as well and made themselves a prime target for even further conquest along the Congo. Eventually, our colonies expand to the point where we're touching up against Akoli and all of the other Central African countries. This gives us a prime opportunity to expand even further. Like a true mad dictator, we put down each and every revolt, while at the same time conquering every equatorial African country along Lake Victoria, all for the purpose of preventing the British from expanding too far into our African subcontinent. However, with all good stories, this one too must end after 50 long years. There is much to take in, much has been done, many countries have been conquered. However, we managed to turn ourselves into the 4th largest GDP in the world. With 62% literacy, 13.6 standard of living, 36 million souls living within our country, and only 5 million radicals and 4 million lovely loyalists, I think we've been doing quite alright for ourselves. Then there's 340 construction and almost a completely modernized law system. I think Transvaal has what it takes to go all the way! If you managed to watch this entire video through its entirety, I would like to thank you. Truly, you guys are kings, each and every one of you. If you'd like to support me, obviously like and subscribe, maybe leave a comment on what I did right and what I did wrong. If you even like this format, please let me know. Your input would always be appreciated. That's gonna be it for me tonight, so I bid you adieu. Always remember, Hail Hydra Cat!